I'm getting to that stage of life where the old Lennon-McCartney song, "When I'm 64, is starting to get uncomfortably close. Actually, it's quite an encouraging fact that a goodly number of you folks out there have reached that exalted age and just sailed serenely past. But that's a nice, jaunty, jolly tune, which will do for a specific day in another year. But today, remember it's Sunday 2020, I'm thinking about a rather different Beatles song. Much less bouncy, rather wistful, verging into distinctly sad. Yesterday. It's apparently the most performed pop song of all time, with over 3,000 recordings made, including even one by Mr. Bean in the film of that name. And you thought Mr. Bean's musical talents were limited to just one finger at the Olympics. And yesterday, the words and the music just seem so perfectly to complement one another, don't they? I was amazed to find a report that they didn't actually emerge together. McCartney supposedly dreamt the tune and had to get to a piano quickly when he woke up the next morning to cement it in his memory. But the words came later. In fact, so this report says, as with many of the Beatles songs, they had substitute lyrics to develop the tune and the arrangement. And the substitute lyrics that are suggested for yesterday are just so ridiculous. I just hope I haven't fallen for a ridiculous internet spoof here. Apparently they were. Take this at, no, maybe not face value. I could be totally wrong, but scrambled eggs. Oh, my baby, how I love your legs, but not as much as I like scrambled eggs. Well, the words fit. I can somehow see that song making it to the top of the pop charts. So I think we stick with the better known official words for this morning. Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it looks as if they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. It is not just generally sad. It's something specific alluded to. Why she had to go, I don't know, she wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Now, to me, that has always appeared to be likely referring to some relationship breakup, because you've got yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. But there's also the possibility suggested, and it's even reported that Paul McCartney said this in an interview at some stage, that he was originally thinking in terms of the death of his mother when he was quite a bit younger. And that false guilt feeling of, was he to blame in some way? And in fact, that's one thing that can always afflict us to some extent come Remembrance Sunday, a kind of survivor guilt. We think back and remember those people who are no longer there. BBC News report one of the mornings this week, a veteran of the Second World War, and then they flashed up on the screen a picture of his mate who died actually in 1946, still flying missions for the RAF. Not bombing anymore, delivering rice to Burma, I think it was. But there was the picture of the guy 75 years back, or however long it was. And this guy now in his 90s looking back and thinking, but I survived. It's possible that no matter how absurd it might be, those what ifs rise up to torment us. Or even a why them, but by implication, why not me? Those words from yesterday chime in so accurately and so tellingly. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. And this year especially, we might feel the force of that suddenly. Suddenly, things are just unrecognizable in our country. People are wearing face coverings in the shops. We're doing church like this. One of the strange memories that will likely stick in my mind was how right back at the start of that original full-on lockdown, you could just walk across that junction at the top of East Hill, not have to worry about cars. In fact, you might even have to wait until one came along. Well, what kind of memories 2020 will evoke in decades to come, when hopefully coronavirus will have subsided to nothing more than probably just seen as a facet of the annual flu season. But that word season is an important one for us to grasp. Times and seasons. For we are creatures of time. It's a hymn that puts it, here for a season, then above. I remember from way back, we were now called year 7 or 8 music in secondary school. A piece of music that we were taught to sing was from part of a piece called The Insect work by Richard Rodney Bennett. Contrasting the life of insects that is usually so very short, we were also taught that 70 summers, when they're gone, will appear as short as one. The whole of our lives we can see as one single protracted season. That's another fair but fairly chilling way to look at it. So let me point you back to that strangely comforting and yet strangely disturbing section from the book of Ecclesiastes we read earlier on. I don't think we need to see this as morbid, but just serious and insightful and helpful. Just look at that big opening claim here. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. I think we could do with seeing this as the first big point to take home from this passage today. Every aspect of our lives is included in this when it comes to this God that we're talking about here. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Folks, it really is important that we get our heads around this. We have a God who really is in charge of this world. You've got it claimed in a psalm, Psalm 135, 5 and 6. For I know that the Lord is great, and that our Lord is above all gods. Whatever the Lord pleases, he does, in heaven and on earth, in the seas and all deeps. That's everywhere. And that would be seriously scary if we were not convinced that God is truly, thoroughly, totally good. Whole kind of problem with the kind of deities that human beings make for themselves is they're not totally good. They're really just overpowered humans with all the faults as well as the powers increased. So if you go on the wrong side of the Greek or Roman gods, then watch out. They can be mean and vindictive in ways that ordinary mortals can't. Mythology is full of humans coming to grisly ends because they annoyed one of them. I vaguely remember a story about, I think it was Prometheus, the Titan, was it? Displeased Zeus by bringing fire to humankind, was punished by Zeus by being eternally chained to a rock. Every night a raven would come and peck out his liver. Every day that was. Every night, unfortunately, Prometheus, being immortal, his liver would regrow. So next day, here we go, round and round again forever. Mean, vindictive stuff. But that's not our God. The God who we really say is in charge. Come to the New Testament and you'll see a wonderfully warming application of that very thought, and of that every thought. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Every one of those various seasons and times fall under the control of our Heavenly Father. So we mustn't think too simplistically of this world as being merely a battlefield between God and Satan, as if they were equal and opposite, or even near equals and opposite. So when things seem to be going wrong in your life, don't take it that somehow the devil is fighting more strongly today and that the forces of heaven are having to give ground, even if, don't worry, they will rally again later and reclaim that lost ground. That's a false picture. We may need to alter our picture, not just of spiritual warfare, however you understand that, but of God himself. He's not simply the God of the nice and the comfortable. Because in this passage, Ecclesiastes 3, even the bad things too are included. And you got that right at the start of the list with the biggest one of all, the biggest of all contrasts, a time to be born and a time to die. Some of the contrasts in this chapter are just reflective of the seasons passing, just what we see as the natural rhythms of life, the time to plant, the time to pluck up what is planted. Some of the contrasts are just different. We wouldn't say there's one better than the other in general, just the timeliness which makes one more appropriate now and another, the opposite, more appropriate at another time. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. And some things clearly that we would say are always undesirable but sometimes necessary. A time for war and a time for peace. So in this world, there will be weddings and there will be funerals. There will be successes and there will be failures. I still feel vaguely, and I know unnecessarily, guilty that when our Jo missed out by just 1 point on her A-level grades that she needed for her first choice university place, it was chemistry that let her down, despite all my efforts to help her. And yet it was at that second choice place, with all the trauma of getting her there with just 3 weeks' notice, the stress of getting her settled into that distant place so far from home. But fortunately, we have to say, with a caring gospel church there to provide the day-to-day and week-to-week support that we couldn't. Yes, it was there at that place that she met the lad who was to become her husband and the father of 2 of our grandchildren. And so there will be times when COVID-19, for example, will turn the world upside down. And a time will come when that will be just a footnote in history. Just like the previous ravages of influenza, that pandemic 100 years back, or the immeasurably worse awfulness of the Black Death in the Middle Ages. That's how this fallen world currently is. But it is a fallen world which God still claims as his own, and over which he reigns for the benefit of his own. And therefore, as another hymn puts it, since all that I meet shall work for my good, the bitter is sweet, the medicine food. So, successes and failures, good times and bad, can both be the ways that God shows his far greater goodness to his people. He doesn't excuse us the difficulties, but his presence and the resurrection of Jesus transforms those difficulties. So facing that biggest bad of all, in 1 Thessalonians 4, we're told, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, coded, who have died. You may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. It's also worth pointing out, isn't it, that no matter what kind of disappointments or travesties we might face, Jesus has been through similar or worse. And yet, it's not just that God claims the extremes of our lives for himself. It's also in everything in between too. There's just routine stuff as well. A time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to keep, and a time to cast away. But notice, we're talking about seasons only. And the passage that we read, there's time for this, and there's time for that. And the implication is that all of those times are just seasons. There are times when we may hope for good health, but there are times when we must also expect less good health. There are some things that we would expect to behave like the seasons or weather around and around, fairly predictable. Others will be more like the fluctuations of the stock market, with far from totally predictable ups and downs. And other seasons, like Shakespeare's Ages of Man, will have a generally predictable order, almost a threatening inevitability. So whichever of these may be the most noticeable to you in your life today, prepare for change. Don't think that things will stay the same indefinitely in your home, in your body, in the nation, certainly in the USA, but in your church too. And how change grabs you will very likely depend on the kind of person you are. For some people, change is invigorating. For others, it's more like devastating. But for all of us, it's coming ready or not as the seasons come and go. Some of us will be stretched. Some of us will be stressed. Whichever it is, prepare to be uncomfortable. Remember that old song, "This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through"? Well, that's right. Or as the Bible puts it, for here we have no lasting city. We talk about vagrants or rough sleepers having no fixed abode. But we're all vagrants or rough sleepers in that sense. We may talk about a permanent address, but the nearest thing that we get to that in this world is 6 feet beneath a tombstone. We don't stay, we don't belong. And deep down inside, we know that we're made for something else, somewhere else, where there will finally be stability. Down here, it's the treadmill of over and over. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. And yes, there are good times, of course there are. He has made everything beautiful in its time. But those times are limited. Make the most of them while you can. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live, and that also everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. But there is still something missing from this world. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. There is an ache and a longing for the reality in which this is just a shadow. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. And actually, that is where our longing needs to be directed, not to yesterday, something more like a tomorrow. For here we have no lasting city, but we see the city that is to come. Like Abraham, the writer of that book of Hebrews tells us a couple of chapters earlier on, Abraham who left his prosperous home and became a nomad living in tents. But he was looking forward to that city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. It's a place beyond the seasons of this life, to judge by the Bible's descriptions of it. Notice how here it is harvest every month. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves were for the healing of the nations. Folks, I don't know the details of your yesterday, but I can promise you that kind of tomorrow, if you will accept in closing this morning a rather different take on remembrance. The last words of a justly condemned criminal, perhaps even less worthy than us of the grace of God, but all of us totally equal in our total need of it. No human hope left. He said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Will you just look back longingly at the yesterdays you will never recapture? Or will you look forward? Will you look upward? Will you look hopeward to Jesus Christ? Because he is the same yesterday and today and forever.